Visit Times Radio on YouTube for the latest videos and interviews.
Early breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio with Elavon. Whatever size your business is, Elavon has a payment solution for you. Find out more at elavon.co.uk.
The Times this morning has a photograph of Keir Starmer arriving in Canada for the G7 summit. They also report that Israel widened its bombing offensive against Iran yesterday, striking the state television building in Tehran. The paper says that President Trump refused to back other Western G7 leaders in calling for the conflict to be wound down, effectively failing to call for Israel to cease fire. Well, at that point, at the time of writing, they didn't know that President Trump was actually going to leave the summit earlier. More on that to come. The Guardian says Israel warns Iranians to flee as the deadly air raids continue. And the Daily Mail talks of the Grooming inquiry. A conspiracy of silence over race doomed thousands of girls to abuse, says the paper. And the Telegraph says asylum seekers and foreign nationals are involved in a significant proportion of live police investigations into child sex grooming gangs. That was what the report yesterday warned. Let's go through the papers in a bit more detail. Andrew Eborn, the broadcaster, barrister, president of Octopus TV, is here. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
The Times puts out a timeline of the scandal, how the child sex grooming story unfolded. You know, it's more than 20 years after the alarm was first raised about child sexual exploitation. We now get the full national inquiry. The question that the paper asked this morning is, how did matters get this far?
No, absolutely. And the grooming scandal is a heartbreaking failure of institutions. Decades of ignored warnings, victim silence and perpetrators shielded. And I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And what the Times does brilliantly in its piece is sort of have a look at the history of this, because you're going all the way back for decades, as they say. What first of all happened, if you look at the early warning signs, was first sounded in the early 2000s. Anne Cryer, who was then the Labour MP for Keighley, she became in 2002 the first public figure to speak out about what they said young Asian lads grooming underage girls in her West Yorkshire constituency. She basically then became a pariah in some corners of her party and a target for what they call the far right. Various other sort of stories came through. There was a Channel 4 documentary you might remember in 2004 that was pulled about the grooming in Bradford after police warned that it could lead to unrest. And again, you look in November 2010, 5 men of Asian heritage from Rotherham were jailed for sexual offences against underage girls. So what the Times does, it does a timeline of this conspiracy of silence, the culture of silence, and it had for years facilitated the sexual exploitation of hundreds of young girls by criminal pimping gangs. And basically that's been the real problem. The chilling truth is now coming out. Why anybody would object to a full inquiry is beyond me, but certainly this U-turn is welcomed by victims and various others. We need to look at what happened, who failed to do what they needed to do, and so on and so forth. And I always say, let's make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces of nervousness, Andrew, is when you hear an inquiry. I mean, we've talked whether it's the infected blood scandal, the post office. They are so lengthy, they take so long. They don't guarantee the right recompense, the right compensation at the end. If we look at what's happened to the post office victims, I mean, do you have faith that a national inquiry will actually fix this?
Yeah, I think it's always the optics on this, isn't it? Because you wonder why things have been buried. And the reason they said you didn't have wanted a national inquiry is they said, well, it's been looked into, it's now time for action. But Rupert Lowe, he wrote basically that none of this would have happened without Elon Musk. He was saying that no inquiry, no justice, nothing. He deserves huge credit for that. I always say, look, trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and trust in certain parts of the media, trust in the police and trust in various institutions is at an all-time low. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need to have the full inquiry so we can find out what happened. And also we need to make sure that it doesn't go on forever because action needs to be taken, as you rightly say.
I mean, what happened was the review that's just been published called for a national inquiry. So the Prime Minister said, look, that's what we're going to have to do. We'll talk in a moment or two about the Prime Minister's popularity, but there has been a really extraordinary piece of reporting from Jack Hill, who's the chief news photographer at The Times, on the beaches in France. He describes it as chaos as police try to stop migrants, because we've talked before, there is this legal loophole. So as soon as a vessel is afloat, the police can't intervene. So you've then got literally a game of cat and mouse between the police and migrants trying to reach the UK. As soon as they get to the boat, there's nothing the police can do.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's the people smuggling gangs. They exploit this loophole, as you brilliantly explained in French law, and it says exactly that. It prevents police from intervening once the boats are in the water. And you have some very distressing pictures, which are in the Times today, and with Jack Hill, he's captured that, and the reality of what it means. And it's not just men. There are small children there, and so on and so forth, being captured accordingly. But there is this sort of cat and mouse where they're sort of trying desperately to get into the water quickly so they can take advantage of this loophole. Now, it has been promised by the French Interior Minister that this year the loophole would be closed, but obviously the change has not yet been made. We need to look at this. We need to keep tackling. It's an issue that we keep coming back to virtually every time I'm on the show, and virtually every day. It's what the last election was all about: small boats and stopping the boats. And the weather's going to get better and better. I can tell you, the number of people trying to cross is going to increase. There will be no surprises there.
Well, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Keir Starmer are supposed to be talking about this today at the G7. So, well, we see if there'll be any developments there. We'll bring them to you here. Interesting piece about what might happen when you apply for a job, or what you might learn about your colleagues. Businesses could be forced to tell workers what your colleagues are earning, because it's sort of an idea to say, how do we improve pay transparency? You know, that tension when you apply for a new job and you've got no idea how much you should ask for, because they don't advertise necessarily always exactly what the role is worth, and how much you think you're worth might be different. What do you think about this? Would it be better if we did actually know how much everyone in our office was earning?
Well, I think that's not necessarily that. It's more about the pay brackets, rather than saying that Joe over there is getting a few £1,000s more than I am, and so on and so forth. So what the new measures are designed to do is to improve pay transparency. And what employers may be required to do is list salary brackets on job adverts. So you turn around and say, OK, such and such a job is going to pay between this and this. And I think what happens, it's inspirational if you say, well, if you do this and we have reviews and so on and so forth, you're at the top end of this particular bracket. And if you don't follow the particular milestones, then you're at the bottom end. And I think it does help people in the workforce to do that. It's one of the sort of taboo subjects, isn't it, in the office, how much people earn, or they sort of snigger that they might be earning a little bit more than somebody else in a similar position. We do need that transparency. I think there needs to be a meritocracy, and transparency helps that.
And there are some organisations, of course, where you know roughly the brackets of what people are earning, whether you're working in the NHS and you're sort of a banded doctor or a nurse, or even if you work at the BBC, they have sort of pay brackets like that. But of course, not elsewhere. So I wonder if that might be welcome if it was introduced elsewhere. What about the Prime Minister's popularity? The Mail are reporting, I think with some glee, it must be said, Andrew, that the Prime Minister's ratings are worse than any other Prime Minister after 300 days in office, which sounds quite American to say in office, but in the role of Prime Minister. Why do you think he might have fared so badly? You know, this is even worse than Gordon Brown.
Well, it is extraordinary. So why has he fared so badly? I mean, there's so many U-turns, so many broken promises and so on and so forth. And as you rightly say, his ratings are in free fall. It's worse than any Prime Minister after 300 days. And you've got from the grooming gang controversies to economic woes. Labour's honeymoon, if ever there was one, is over. And basically, voters are just fed up with unfulfilled promises. I think, as you rightly say, the piece is revelling in the glee that this is the case. I should point out that obviously one person who didn't feature in this because she didn't last 300 days was Liz Truss.
Of course,
she wasn't included in comparison because she was gone after 45 days. But it is extraordinary to see what happens. I think Sir Keir scored around minus 33, which is lower than the minus 30 Gordon Brown was averaging at the same point. Former Prime Minister's numbers plummeted thereafter, whereas Sir Keir's appear to have plateaued, is what they're saying. I don't mind U-turns if you do the right thing eventually, and I think it's always good to say in political circles, people say, it's outrageous they do a U-turn. If you get more evidence, and that's a big if, and circumstances change, you should be able to make a more informed decision and say, we changed our mind. But there have been so many broken promises, so many U-turns, whether it's about pensioners and so on and so forth. He's just not getting it right.
Yeah, well, for comparison, Boris Johnson was on plus 19 at this stage, 300 days in. Theresa May, plus 18. Tony Blair, plus 46.
Amazing, isn't it?
Rishi Sunak, though, I despair here, minus 22. So it's not as bad as where Keir Starmer is now, but my goodness, that was miserable, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Final thing. A stinking farce, the Daily Mail puts it as. 100 truckloads of Scotland's rubbish is going to be dumped in England. This is the estimation, because black bag rubbish can't be dumped in Scotland. So the solution the experts are worrying about is they will just simply cross the border and chuck it in a landfill site in England. What's happening?
It's outrageous, isn't it? So what's happening is the Scottish government, they're set to bar black bag waste from being buried at landfill sites from December the 31st. And the analysis say that the country lacks enough incinerators to cope with the extra demand. So there's a possibility that it's going to be buried at landfill sites in England. Now, that's going to get everybody's blood boiling, isn't it? But critics say that there's been an insufficient progress on how Scotland will deal with its landfill once the new system sets in. We need to make sure this is addressed really, really quickly because we don't want their rubbish here.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's a cartoon of a gentleman who quite clearly is Scottish in a kilt. It was ridiculous, really. Going to the post office with a big black bag of rubbish saying, I don't mind where it's delivered anywhere in England. I think England won't want it either. Andrew,
yes.
Thank you very much. Andrew Eborn,
Always
the
a pleasure.
broadcaster, barrister, president of Octopus TV, going through the papers with me.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio. Thank